Aaron Whitlock used to look at the financial district through the greasy bus window, like someone staring at a world that was never built for him. A few days earlier, he had walked into one of those buildings, sure that he finally had a real chance to change his life, and walked out with empty hands, carrying only the stubborn memory of a choice he'd made in the middle of the street that had cost him the position. As he straightens the same simple shirt and takes a deep breath in front of the revolving door, he still doesn't know if he was naive or if he was the only one there who refused to step on someone else just to climb. Inside, mirrored elevators carry executives to high floors where million-dollar decisions are made and nobody remembers who cleans the floors downstairs. Outside is Aaron, just another young guy in most people's eyes, about to find out that one small act of humility in the crosswalk caught the attention of a kind of power he never imagined he'd face head-on. And before I tell you how that unlikely meeting turns his life upside down, tell me in the comments, from what city, state, or country are you watching this story today? Aaron Whitlock had memorized the route to downtown Phoenix's financial center long before he ever landed that interview. That morning, the sun seemed twice as strong, bouncing off the glass facades of buildings where wealth and power signed contracts behind automatic doors. He walked with a cheap folder tucked under his arm, wearing the neatest shirt he owned, ironed the night before on the kitchen table. Every step was a mix of fear and anticipation. If this worked out, maybe it would be the last time he'd have to choose between paying the light bill or the late rent. His worn-out sneakers scraped the hot asphalt as he crossed another block. Aaron had rehearsed the interview script so many times in his head that he could almost hear the questions echoing. He knew the company's name, the founder's story, the last quarter's numbers. What he didn't have, and felt in his skin, was the privilege of messing up. For a lot of people around there, a new position was just one more career upgrade. For him, it was a chance to get out of the marathon of side gigs and extra shifts in cafes that treated their staff with a quiet kind of arrogance. When he stopped at the light in front of the busiest avenue, Aaron looked at the building where he was supposed to check in. Marble lobby, pressed security guards, luxury cars pulling up like part of the decor. He took a deep breath and tugged at his collar, feeling a twinge of not belonging that had nothing to do with competence and everything to do with the brutal contrast between his simple life and that world of wealth on the other side of the street. Even so, there was a solid humility inside him, the certainty that if someone gave him a chance, he'd hold on with both hands. The light turned green for pedestrians, and the rushing crowd surged forward like a human current. Aaron stepped into the flow, careful not to trip, eyes bouncing between the watch on his wrist and the crosswalk stripes, mentally calculating how much delay was still acceptable. His heart raced, not just from the interview nerves, but from the feeling that he was literally walking toward a possible turning point in his life. He couldn't afford to waste a second, not today. But right in the middle of the crossing, something broke the rhythm of the crowd. A few steps ahead, a young woman staggered like the heat had suddenly drained every ounce of strength from her body. People started to swerve around her, annoyed, like she was just another obstacle in their way. Aaron felt his body react before his mind did. The folder slipping in his fingers, his stride slowing, his eyes locked on that body about to hit the ground. In a fraction of a second, he stood between two worlds. The world of his long-dreamed opportunity and the world of a simple decision not to ignore someone collapsing in front of him. And right there, in the middle of the avenue, the first act of kindness started to change everything, even though he had no idea yet. Aaron didn't think twice. He let the folder drop almost in the middle of the crosswalk, rushed a few steps ahead, and caught the young woman right as her knees began to give way. A burst of honking exploded around them, drivers furious over one more delay in the city. But he only saw her pale face, her eyes trying and failing to focus on anything. With a clumsy move, he pulled her out of the traffic, guiding her light body to the sidewalk like he was carrying something too fragile to let fall. "Hey, "Stay with me here," he muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. She blinked a few times, breathing hard, like she was coming back from somewhere far away. The sun hit her face directly, and Aaron noticed a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead, mixing with makeup beginning to smear. He looked around, searching for any patch of shade, and spotted a building recess with a small glass awning. Carefully, he helped her stand and led her over, one slow step at a time, like you walk someone after an emotional crash. Sitting on the curb, he opened the water bottle he kept in his backpack and held it out. "Drink slowly, or you'll get dizzy again." Her fingers trembled as she gripped the plastic, and for a second Aaron realized how absurd the scene looked. Him, late for the most important interview of his life, sharing the only water he had with a stranger who had almost collapsed in the middle of the avenue. Even so, there was something in the humility of that gesture that spoke directly to his conscience. The watch on his wrist kept reminding him of the time, but he refused to look for a few more seconds. When her breathing finally started to steady, her skin still flushed from the heat, she tried to sit a little straighter, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to cause trouble," she said, her voice rough. "I guess I didn't eat right, and this sun..." Aaron shrugged. Being late wasn't even part of the equation. "Better you cause trouble alive than drop right there in the middle of traffic, right?" A half smile tugged at the corner of her lips, revealing that beneath the scare there was someone used to being in control. In that split second, he had no idea he was sitting next to someone directly tied to the kind of wealth and power he'd only ever seen from a distance. They sat in silence for a moment, listening as the city flow reorganized itself like nothing had happened. Aaron realized he could simply stand up, apologize, and sprint to his interview building to try to salvage what was left of the schedule. But he stayed. He asked if she needed to call someone, if she wanted him to hail a car, if she had any health issues. That simple choice, to stay a bit longer, even with the world screaming, "Hurry up," is the kind of gesture most people never notice, but that reroutes entire lives. And if stories like this, where wealth and humility collide in the middle of the chaos, speak to you in any way, it's worth subscribing to the channel so you can keep following these lives that, deep down, look a lot like ours. Little by little, the young woman's voice and senses came back. Her name he'd learn soon enough, Harper Cole. Before that, what kept him there wasn't curiosity. It was that stubborn feeling that you don't leave someone in the middle of the street just because you're in a hurry. While cars moved on and clocks kept turning, Aaron still didn't know it, but the real turning point of that day wasn't waiting inside the interview room. It was right there under that simple awning, where a stranger chose to be kind without expecting anything in return. When Harper was finally standing on her own and certain she was okay, Aaron finally dared to look at his watch. The minute hand seemed to mock him. He did the quick math in his head and felt his stomach drop. Even if he ran, he was already past the time set for the interview. That kind of big company, with marble lobbies and flawless receptionists, wasn't known for being patient with late arrivals. Even so, he took a breath, helped Harper check if she had her wallet, her phone, an emergency contact, and only then got up. He didn't sprint away, didn't cut the conversation short. He said goodbye with a "if you feel weird again, please get help," and only then crossed back toward the building. The blast of air conditioning hit him like an icy punch as he stepped into the lobby. Aaron immediately felt the contrast. Expensive suits, rich perfume, people talking about high numbers. They were just calendar details. The receptionist lifted her eyes from the computer with a trained smile. That smile lasted exactly 2 seconds, until he said his name and the time he was supposed to arrive. Her eyes dropped to the screen, slid up to the clock on the wall, then back to him with that mix of polished arrogance and impatience. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vitlip. The recruiter is already in another meeting. Their schedule was packed today." The sentence was polite, but the message was obvious. You missed it. He still tried to argue, explaining that there had been an emergency on the street, that someone had gotten sick. But out loud, it just sounded like the classic excuse of someone who didn't plan well. The silence at the counter stretched uncomfortably. A few people in line behind him were already looking his way, with "Not my problem" written all over their faces. Aaron felt his cheeks heat up, not just because he was late, but because he realized that in that world of wealth and rush, the value of someone who stops to help a stranger doesn't fit on any spreadsheet. The receptionist offered a generic contact email and wished him a good day that had nothing to do with how he felt inside. When he stepped back outside, the sun seemed even harsher than before. Aaron stood for a few seconds on the sidewalk, staring at the traffic and the glass facade like he was watching a movie he'd been cut from at the last minute. He could have blamed himself, called himself an idiot, decided right then that next time he'd walk right past anyone collapsed on the sidewalk. But that's not how he was wired. He walked to the bus stop, sat on the metal bench, and let his head rest against the wall, breathing deeply. It felt like defeat, of course, but it wasn't regret. Deep down, he still believed losing a position was less serious than losing his own humanity. In the days that followed, life slipped back into the same old mode. Broken shifts at a corner cafe, app deliveries at night, odd jobs that paid little and cost a lot. Aaron passed by other glass and concrete towers, watching from a distance that world where power seemed to shield people from late buses, crowded commutes, and unbearable heat. Sometimes, while wiping down a table or closing the register, the crosswalk scene replayed in his head on a loop. He even caught himself chuckling alone, thinking, if there were some kind of automatic reward system for people who do the right thing, this account should be overflowing by now. But the raw truth he knew was different. Most days, kindness seemed to bring nothing more than extra exhaustion. Even so, there was this thin, stubborn thread of humility holding him up. Aaron didn't romanticize his life. He knew he was worn out. He knew the system didn't care about someone who showed up late because they stopped to help. But every time he remembered Harper's terrified eyes, slowly coming back into focus, he had the feeling that, on that day, he'd made the only choice he'd be able to face in the mirror. Without knowing it, while he washed cups and checked orders, he carried inside himself a quiet turning point. He'd lost a visible opportunity, but planted without realizing the seed of something the world hadn't shown him yet. The days that followed all bled together, like someone had hit repeat on the same routine. Aaron woke up too early for the little sleep he'd gotten, took 2 buses, punched in at the corner cafe, and served lattes to people in suits who barely glanced at the face behind the tray. At night, he still accepted a few delivery runs to make rent. The sting from the lost interview still poked at him, but it didn't hurt like that first day. What hurt more was the feeling that in the world of power and wealth, people like him were easily replaceable. The crosswalk scene, Harper almost collapsing, flashed in his mind now and then. One of those memories you keep but never really expect will lead to anything. On an especially hot afternoon, he was in the back of the cafe washing a stack of cups when his phone buzzed in his apron pocket. Unknown number. Aaron almost ignored it, assuming it was a credit card offer or a collection call. He answered anyway, voice tired, ready to say, "No, thanks." On the other end, a firm female voice introduced herself as the executive assistant to the CEO of Lane & Cole Holdings, the same company from the missed interview. She pronounced his full name with a formality he'd only seen in movies. And for a second, Aaron thought it had to be a prank. "Mr. Vitlup, could you come to our headquarters on Friday at 2 p.m.? "Are you available?" she asked, like she was scheduling any other meeting. He stammered, looking around as if someone there might explain what was happening. "Sorry, would this be another interview?" There was a short pause. "Not exactly. Our CEO would like to speak with you personally." The phrase landed in his chest with a weight he didn't know how to name: CEO. He'd never spoken to a department manager, let alone the person who ran that entire empire. After he hung up, he stood frozen for a few seconds, with the phone still at his ear while the water kept running into the sink. Slowly, the cafe noise faded back in. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clinking of change, someone complaining about the Wi-Fi. Aaron felt his heart race, but not like he'd hit the jackpot. It was more a strange, automatic wariness. Did they find something out? Is this about the interview mess? Did I do something wrong without knowing? His mind started building scenarios, from best to worst, without finding a single logical explanation. That night at home, he took off his apron and collapsed into the kitchen chair, staring at the confirmation email the assistant had sent. The CEO's name glowed on the screen like a reminder that there were flaws and decisions far above the level he lived on. Aaron didn't know if this was a second chance, a mix-up, or just some bureaucratic formality. What he did know was that suddenly his path was crossing again with that world of wealth and polished arrogance that had tossed him aside without a second thought days earlier. And without realizing it, he was walking once again toward the same family he'd helped, without asking for anything in return. On Friday, when he put on his best shirt again and smoothed the stubborn creases with his palm, the feeling was different from the first time. There was fear, of course, but also a curious humility. The awareness that whatever the reason for that meeting, he was still the same guy who stopped at the crosswalk because he simply couldn't turn away. And with that same heart, he pushed through the revolving door of Lane & Cole's headquarters, unaware that inside, the true turning point of his life was already in motion. The assistant led him down thick carpeted hallways where the walls were lined with framed photos of buildings, mergers, and awards. Every step Aaron took sounded different there, like he'd stepped into territory reserved for the kind of wealth he'd only ever seen from afar. When the elevator opened on the top floor, the setting changed again. A quiet hall, a few doors, panoramic views of the city burning in the heat below. The glass nameplate that read, "Our Lane, Chief Executive Officer," felt more like a border than an ID. He took a deep breath, straightened his sleeves, and heard the assistant's cue. "You can go in, Mr. Vitlop. They're expecting you." The office was large but not ostentatious. A solid desk, shelves of neatly aligned books, a leather couch in the corner, and behind the desk, a man with carefully trimmed gray hair, a flawless suit, and the practiced expression of someone who'd made hard calls for years. Standing beside him was Harper, this time alert, steady, with a different light in her eyes. No smeared makeup. Dressed in a simple, elegant outfit, she looked like a completely different person from the young woman who'd almost collapsed on the asphalt. Aaron stopped in the doorway for a second, stunned to see her there in the very heart of the power that had shut its doors on him so easily days before. "Mr. Vitlop, thank you for coming," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm Richard Lane." The last name confirmed what Aaron already suspected. Lane & Cole wasn't just a pretty logo on a building. It was the surname of the man who made the rules there. Harper stepped forward, her smile now free of embarrassment. "Aaron, I don't know if you really remember me," she began. He let out a nervous half laugh. "Hard to forget someone who almost passed out in the middle of a crosswalk." The mood softened a little, and even Richard allowed himself a brief smile before returning to CEO posture. Harper took a breath and started telling her version of the story to her father and to him. She talked about the brutal heat, the dizziness, the exact moment she felt the ground disappear, and how, instead of being shoved to the edge by the crowd, she was caught by someone who could have just kept walking. She told him Aaron had shared his water, his shade, his time, that he didn't look away when she apologized for the mess, that he didn't treat the situation with arrogance or as an annoyance. While she spoke, Aaron noticed the way Richard watched her. It wasn't just a father's concern, but also the clinical gaze of someone used to reading people, risk, character, When she finished, Richard picked up the thread. "My daughter is a project director here at the company, Aaron." He used Aaron's first name naturally, as if they were on the same level, but the weight of the sentence made it clear they weren't. That day, you had no idea who she was, or that you were just a few steps away from the building where your interview would have been. Aaron nodded, his hands restless. "I honestly didn't connect anything. I just saw someone in trouble." Richard leaned his elbows on the desk, fingers interlaced. "Exactly. And that's why you're here. The position you missed has already been filled. But I didn't bring you up to the top floor of a conglomerate that moves billions a year just to apologize and send you back to the cafe." He slid a folder across the desk toward Aaron. Inside was a job description, salary, benefits, far beyond anything he dared to imagine when he first applied. It was a spot in an internal talent development program with direct access to projects he'd only see from a distance anywhere else. Aaron needed a few seconds to find his voice. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his throat tight. "Just tell me if you accept," Richard replied. "I'd say someone who's willing to lose an opportunity for an act of humility deserves a bigger chance than the one he had before. The wealth we build in here can't just be numbers on a screen. It has to be built by people who actually see other people." Harper stepped a little closer, her expression gentle but firm. "I could have stayed invisible on that asphalt, Aaron. You didn't let that happen." She shrugged, like finally admitting something that had been echoing in her head for days. "And I didn't want you to stay invisible to us in here." He felt the ground shift under him in a whole new way, nothing like that moment in the crosswalk. It was as if the world had done a full loop to bring him back to the exact point where, out of sheer principle, he chose to help. It didn't erase the exhaustion or the hardness of what he'd lived through, but it sparked a new feeling. Sometimes the turning point doesn't come wrapped as luck, it comes wrapped as recognition. And if, listening to this scene, you remember a time when you were seen or ignored for a gesture like that, share it in the comments. Stories like this help a lot of people recognize themselves. Aaron stared at the folder one more time before answering. It wasn't a miracle falling out of the sky. It was a door opened by someone who, from the very top, had paid attention to what happened down there in the heat, the rush, the chaos. He lifted his eyes to Richard and Harper, feeling the weight and the lightness of that moment all at once. Life hadn't suddenly turned magical, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that his effort, his quiet kindness, and his stubborn refusal to harden had finally found a place where they could grow. And this was only the beginning of what that new chance could become. Aaron's first day at Lane & Cole was no fairy tale. There was no red carpet, no motivational speech. There were complicated internal systems, acronyms he'd never heard before, and curious stares, some genuinely kind, others weighing his presence like a number on a spreadsheet. He was placed on a small team directly tied to the company's expansion projects. The salary, the benefits, the view from the high floor. No doubt it was a dive into a world of wealth he'd only ever seen from the cafe counter. But inside, Aaron was still the same guy who took crowded buses and did mental math to see if he could afford new sneakers. Harper, now in full director mode, was firm in meetings. But she didn't treat Aaron like the guy who saved me. On the contrary, she demanded punctuality, asked for reports, reviewed his ideas. At times, her demanding posture looked a lot like the harsh side of corporate power, the one with no patience for mistakes. But in the breaks, she asked about his neighborhood, about the cafe he'd worked at, laughed when he told stories about arrogant customers who treated servers like they were invisible. Their relationship didn't turn into instant friendship or some unlikely romance. It became something much rarer in that environment. Respect, slowly built between two worlds, learning to look each other in the eye. Richard Lane didn't become some kind of corporate father. He stayed the busy CEO, surrounded by commitments and heavy decisions. But every so often, he'd call Aaron into meetings where he wanted to hear the perspective of someone who used to be on the other side of the counter. In one of them, while discussing a project that would affect frontline workers, he asked, "If this had been decided back when you worked at the cafe, how would it have hit you?" The question was simple, but carried a quiet shift. Power allowing itself to be crossed by the humility of someone who, not long ago, couldn't even get past the revolving door. Aaron realized then they hadn't given him a job just out of gratitude. They'd given him a place where the way he sees people could actually make an impact. At the end of an especially tough day, after staying late to review numbers and slides, Aaron stopped on the sidewalk in front of the building and looked out over the same avenue from the day of the missed interview. The crosswalk was still there, unchanged, crowded with people rushing across without looking up. Heat still rose from the asphalt, even though the sun had already dipped. He stood there for a few seconds, like he was watching an old version of himself in the crowd, clutching a cheap folder, trying to believe he was worth something in there. The turning point wasn't just the new job. It was the fact that even now, with a badge, better pay, and a panoramic view, he still noticed every face passing by. Breathing in the warm air, Aaron realized that the doors that had slammed in his face that first day weren't a punishment. They were a necessary detour so something bigger could click into place. If he had arrived perfectly on time, he might have gotten the normal position, worked in some corner, become just another line on a spreadsheet. Instead, it was that seemingly wrong choice, staying with a stranger who collapsed in the middle of the avenue, that put him exactly where he was now. His life hadn't turned into a fairy tale. The bills still came, the insecurities too. But now he carried a new certainty. Sometimes the true wealth isn't what hits your bank account, it's what stays when you have to decide who you're going to be in the middle of the chaos. And it was because he refused to step on anyone in his rush to rise that he discovered some doors only open when you stop to take someone else's hand. When Aaron crosses that same crosswalk again, now with his Lane and Cole badge hanging from his neck, he understands that none of this was just some pretty movie coincidence. Losing the position hurt. The system's arrogance was real. The grind of side jobs was brutal. But in the end, it was the exact moment he chose not to walk over someone that opened a door he never would have dared to knock on. The wealth around him is still made of glass, steel, and numbers. But inside, he's learned that what really holds it all up are the quiet choices nobody ever logs in a spreadsheet. Outside, he still sees people in too much of a hurry to notice who's about to collapse along the way. Inside, he now has a voice to remind everyone that decisions made at the top always land in the lives of people who take buses, sweep floors, and answer phones. And that's where the true turning point lives. It's not just the simple kid being pulled into the world of power. It's power being forced to look back at the people it's always pretended not to see. At the end of a story like this, one question lingers in a good way. If your best shot at making it meant ignoring someone lying in front of you, what would you do in Aaron's place? Have you ever lived something that shook your sense of justice like that? Tell us in the comments which part of this story hit you hardest. If this narrative touched you in any way, take a breath before jumping to the next video and help this channel keep telling stories like this. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Here we talk about wealth, sure, but especially about the things money can never fix on its own.